Okay, you're looking at 3 investments. So we'll end up calling those X, Y, and Z. The part that is invested at 2% we'll call X. The part that's invested at 3% we'll call Y. And the part at 4% is Z. So if they receive this 120, then 2%, and I'm putting this in decimal, would be from X, and then 3% from what we're calling Y, 4% what we're calling Z, and this equals 120. And then it also says there's 500 more invested at 3%, so the 3% is Y, 500 more than the 2%, which is X. And then finally, the somewhere here, the amount invested at 4%, which is Z, is 2 times the amount invested at 3%, which would be Y. Now, the first thing, I do a couple of things. One, I put all the variables on one side, but another thing that I do is I know how students really don't like fractions and decimals, so I multiply this by 100. And why by 100? 10 hundredths. And so what's going to happen when you multiply this by 100 is you're going to get 2x plus 3y plus 4z equals 12,000. And it's just nicer, right? Because you're not having to deal with decimals. Then I'm going to move the x to the other side. We have plus y. We have no z. So that equals 500. And then chunk the 2y to the other side so it becomes negative, plus z equals 0. So now I have something that I am ready to solve. So the first thing that I do is I multiply this equation by 2, and then I'm going to add it to this one. So I'm not changing the first equation. 3y plus 4z equals 12,000. I'm multiplying this by 2, so 2 times x, negative 2x, 2 times y plus 2y, there is no z, and then 2 times 500, I get 1,000. If I add these together, those cancel. I get 5y plus 4z equals 13,000. Now, something I see looking at my third equation, what if I multiplied it by negative 4 and added it to this one? You see why? You see why? You see why? That 4z, I want to cancel it out. So I don't, again, have an x. Negative 4 times negative 2y is 8y. Negative 4 times z, which is the whole point of what I wanted, and then negative 4 times 0 is just 0. So look how nicely now I am down to one variable, and so I can solve for y and I get 1,000. And now I can just simply use all my other formulas up here. So if I use my negative 2y plus z equals 0, so I'm using this third equation, and I plug in y is 1,000 plus z equals 0, then I can solve and I get z is 2,000. And then finally I can use my negative x plus y equals 500, plug in y is 1,000, and solving this I get x equals 500. So that tells me that the 2%, I'll write this a different color, 2% invested is 500 because that was x. The 3% invested is 1,000 because that was y. And then finally z, which is the 4% invested, is 2,000.